What is up, guys? Nate here with Responsible Armed Korean, here to talk to you about the MCX Virtus. Now, the MCX Virtus has exploded in popularity lately, due in a large part, in my opinion, to Call of Duty Modern Warfare, where it's called the M13. Now, the MCX Virtus comes in a lot of different variations, so we're just going to go down a quick list of the features of the MCX Virtus. Now, first of all, it's highly modular. You can swap out barrel, caliber, and the handguard within a matter of minutes. As a civilian, it allows you to change configurations quite easily. The MCX Virtus also features a cold hammer forged barrel. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the science behind a cold hammer forged barrel. What you need to know is that cold hammer forged barrels tend to be higher quality and tend to have higher accuracy than non-cold hammer forged barrels. The MCX also functions off of a short stroke piston system, but the MCX functions off of something more similar to an AK style piston system, where it's got guide rods and the recoil springs running along the top of the bolt carrier group. This does mean it shoots a lot cleaner. The buildup of carbon tends to happen in a different place, and it's not blowing it into your chamber, which with AR-15s can cause reliability issues if it gets too dirty. Because the MCX functions off of a short stroke piston and it doesn't have an inline recoil system like the AR-15, it allows for the use of a folding stock. With the MCX, you can fire it as much as you want with the buttstock folded. The other nice thing about the MCX is that it has the same fire controls as an AR-15. Now, even though it has subtle differences elsewhere, the general controls are the same. Now let's go ahead and talk about my personal MCX Virtus. This is mine. This is the MCX Virtus Patrol. So it's got a 16-inch barrel. It did have a full-length handguard, which, honestly, guys, it looks kind of awkward and chonky. So I actually did a chop job on it. I don't recommend this for everyone, but if you like do-it-yourself projects and you want to try it, it's really not that difficult. And if you're okay with it being a homemade chop job, then that's a route you can go if you end up getting the Virtus Patrol. I just didn't like having that much weight and that much extra handguard coming out all the way to the end of the barrel. I didn't particularly like how it looked or how the ergonomics were with it set up that way. Now, a lot of people like to know how people set up their rifles. This rifle has gone through some optic changes, I'll be honest, because I kept going back and forth between running a lighter weight red dot, which kind of helps offset the fact that it is a heavy rifle, and running something that, in my opinion, it deserves, which is a low power variable optic. This does have a cold hammer forged barrel. It does have a 16-inch barrel, which means that it is fairly accurate. And now I haven't gotten to test it as much as I'd like to, but it was doing about inch and a half groupings at 100, which is really good. So having an LPVO on it seems to make sense. Now, it does increase the weight, but again, we'll kind of get to that. So let's talk a little bit about how I've set up my MCX. So we'll go front to back. Up here in the front, I'm running it's just the Sig 3-prong flash hider. It's what comes on the gun. Now, something to note about this is the MCX has the taper barrel, the Sig taper barrel. You can't just unthread their muzzle device and put on your own without using the adapter that comes in the box. Basically, it's an adapter that just sits onto the threaded area and creates a 90-degree shelf. Now, the reason this barrel is tapered like this, it's set up to use SIG's line of suppressors and muzzle devices, which use the taper mount. But I'm still running their 3-prong. I might switch to a compensator later on. Honestly, guys, and we'll get to it when I talk a little bit about how it feels to run the gun, the recoil impulse is very low. I don't feel like I need a compensator. The flash hider does what it needs to, and so it may be a while before I switch it out. Not sure. Moving back from there, again, I'm running the OEM handguard. It's M-lock. The Virtus has the M-lock. I did chop it to about 12.5 inches. I still have a little bit of finishing work to do. I'm running Troy medium height diamond battle flip-up sights. I got these on a killer deal back in the day. It was $100 for the set, and I've been running them on various rifles ever since. I'm running them on the MCX because I needed my scope to clear the rear sight, so I actually took the Sig sights off and put them on my AR, which I'll show you here in a minute. So this is the Streamlight Protac Railmount 2. It is on an Arisaka raised scout mount. So it actually is a flat piece that raises the light up just a little bit. You can see how the mount is here, and it raises it up. It gets it a lot closer to the rail than a Picatinny slot would. So that's what I'm running. I'm running it with their pressure switch on top. Moving back from there, I have the Gen 2 Vortex Strike Eagle 1-6. This is the new one. I'll do a review later on this optic. I may upgrade down the road. But the other part of it is too, I wanted to try out the Gen 2. I'd looked through and shot with Strike Eagle Gen 1. Wasn't super impressed. The Gen 2 I think has improved on a couple things, but we'll talk about that later. Now it's sitting on an ADM Recon extended QD mount. I wanted it to be QD in case I decided to switch optics down the road, because honestly I am ADD when it comes to guns and setups, so I wanted the convenience of having the quick detach. Moving back, everything else is OEM on this rifle. Geisley makes Geisley and Radian both make aftermarket charging handles. I haven't gotten one yet. Part of it is because it's out of stock everywhere. So if I find one, I'll probably be replacing the charging handle, as there is an issue. Well, I say issue. There's a thing about the OEM charging handle. Do you notice? Can you see how that moves? It's very slender. And what you get is quite a bit of flex in the way it sits in the channel. And so you actually start to get a little bit of wear on the frame when you're using the charging handle. And the Radian and the Geisley fix that by making the charging handle a little bit wider so that it stays in the upper position. You don't get the back end of your charging handle wearing on the rifle. Now showing you again, the buttstock does fold and it locks in. You just pull to release. And the way it works is it drops into this little notch. It's a very strong folding system. The buttstock is a little bit rattly, but it is solid to use. So while it's not my favorite buttstock that I've ever shot with, it's also not my least favorite, and it's relatively comfortable, and it works for what it is. Now you can get adapters for this rifle. You'll notice that the way this sits on here, this piece here is actually Picatinny. So the whole folding device actually goes onto this Picatinny rail on the back. So you can get other adapters that use, say, a standard buffer tube, which allow you to use a standard AR stock. I may do that down the road, but the nice thing about this one is how tight it folds up to the side, at least for a very compact package. This rifle, when it's folded, is actually shorter than my 11.5 AR with the brace all the way collapsed. So honestly, it works well for what it is. I'm probably not going to upgrade that anytime soon. So next, let's talk a little bit about the similarities between the MCX and an AR-15. Because honestly, guys, that's one of the questions you see all the time on the internet is, what are the differences, what are the similarities, and why would you choose something like an MCX over an AR-15? Now, while we'll get into that question a little bit later, I do want to talk a little bit about the similarities and the differences. Similarities. The most obvious one about the similarities are the fire controls. Just looking at this, you can tell it has a few aesthetic differences, but overall the controls are the same. Your safety selector is right where it should be for an AR. You've got your forward assist. Now the nice thing about this, some people don't like running forward assists on AR-15s. Whether they're necessary or not, we're not going to debate that here. I don't mind them, and especially on the MCX, it's kind of down and out of the way, which is nice. It doesn't really get in the way of the charging handle or anything like that. This has a nice magazine release. It's not extended, but it's taller, which means you can hit it in different places. It's easy to hit. The other nice thing about the SIGs, and this is true about the MCX and the M400 Tread and some of their others that have the lower, is they're fully ambidextrous. Notice on this side, here's your bolt catch. Now I just said fully ambidextrous. The bolt catch isn't ambidextrous, but it is easy to actuate because it's got this little paddle right here, so it's easy to catch your bolt. It also has an ambi mag release. So not fully ambidextrous, but really close. You can get a battery assist device, kind of like a bad lever. It's not exactly a bad lever. I can't remember what company makes it, but you can get a battery assistance device that goes onto the paddle, goes through the trigger guard just like the bad lever from Magpul that allows you to manipulate the bolt with your index finger. The MCX Virtus also uses an AR style pistol grip. You notice here it looks a lot like a Magpul, but it is Sig's version. One of the big differences I can see, it's got about the same angle as the K2 grip from Magpul, but it's not quite as wide on the back here underneath the beaver tail. I'm actually going to replace this with a K2. I like a little bit more material right here. It just is more comfortable for shooting. So the takedown on the MCX is pretty much identical to an AR. You've got 2 push pins. It does use an AR style hammer and trigger. Now reports have said that certain triggers don't work. I haven't found one yet that doesn't work, but there are things like the Geisley SSA, which is designed for the MCX, but it's about a $300 trigger. It will take standard AR triggers. I dropped in an Aero Precision hammer and trigger that seemed to work, but you can change out triggers. Just know that it may have issues with certain triggers, and again, this is just off of forums online, so this isn't 100% accurate in terms of I can back it up. I'm just telling you what I've read and seen about AR triggers in the MCX platform. Now here are a few of the differences between the MCX and the AR-15. So the AR-15 functions off of a direct impingement system. Now what that means is that when the round is fired and the gas comes through the gas port down the gas tube, it actually shoots this hot gas directly into the chamber, into a gas key on the top of the bolt carrier group, which unlocks your locking lugs and then allows the carrier to reciprocate. What this leads to is a lot of fouling essentially inside of the chamber, and it gets dirtier and dirtier the more you shoot. The MCX uses something more akin to the AK platform. Now the AK uses a long stroke piston, MCX uses a short stroke piston, but basically what you've got a piston in here that the gas hits the plunger of the piston, which then drives backwards, and that reciprocates your bolt. Now you'll see it in the B-roll here. I'll still go ahead and break it down and try and show you, but you will see the B-roll of the recoil springs and guide rod. Now you'll notice here, that is your bolt. Okay, you've got your recoil springs on the top. This does tilt, but it is captive, and your bolt carrier group looks very similar to an AR, just really short, and it runs along this carrier on the top. What that means, again, the AR-15 operates off of direct impingement. It also uses an inline recoil system, where it's got a buffer system in the tube of the receiver extension, so when your bolt carrier group comes back, it captures that recoil and shoves it back forward. Now this one, you've got the carrier running underneath of your recoil springs, and so it's not quite as an efficient transfer of energy. But honestly, this is a really soft shooting gun, which again we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to ergonomics and such. Being a piston gun, it does add a little bit of weight up front. Now I don't have a scale, and I'm sorry about that, so this is just going off of what it's like to shoot both my AR-15 and the MCX. It does have a little bit more weight up front. I don't think it's that bad, and it's not overly front heavy. Now especially with the light on the front, that adds quite a bit of weight. But it is heavier than an AR-15. So that is one of the other differences. We already kind of talked about it earlier when we were talking about the features of the MCX, but obviously the folding stock is a difference. You can get a folding stock for an AR-15, but it will not function with the stock folded. So next let's talk about what it's like to shoot the MCX. Now, I'm going to warn you, and you probably know this, it's really hard to put into words how something feels to shoot when it's very similar. So it shoots like a 5.56. It doesn't feel quite the same as shooting an AR-15. Weight and all that kind of stuff aside, when you shoot something that doesn't have a chunk of metal flying back and forth right next to your ear with the recoil spring inside making noise, it does kind of feel different. And with the way that the recoil and the guide rods are above the carrier, it has a very pleasant recoil impulse. It doesn't jump quite as much, in my opinion, as an AR-15. And that leads to a pretty flat shooting gun. Now it's hard to tell whether or not all of that is in part to the recoil system, or if, you know, being a weighty gun really changes how the rifle feels. But I've shot a lot of 16-inch ARs as well. This is one of the nicest shooting guns out of the box that I think I've ever fired. Now, again, as I talked about it earlier, it is a heavy gun. What that means is that when you're operating this and you have a lot of weight, especially again with me running a light out front, you've got a lot of front weight, so holding it up for extended periods of time can get tiring. Now, you're just out for a range session, you're probably okay, but trekking with this thing, it is heavy. Much heavier than I think like a recce build with an AR-15 would be. It does make a difference on speed when you're transitioning between targets. You do want to get a good, solid C-clamp grip, in my opinion, to help control that front weight. But honestly, guys, the rifle shoots so nice that these are small criticisms, and not really even criticisms, but just observations of what it's like to run this versus an AR-15. Pointability and ergonomics. It has a much larger handguard. Now, part of that is it's quite comfortable actually to grip, either with the vertical grip, which I tend to use partially like a hand stop like this, or to do a full-on C grip with my thumb over the top. It's a comfortable handguard. And it's kind of nice too. It sets itself apart from the really slim handguards that you see on a lot of AR-15s. Now, I say that in an example. I'm running a pretty slim handguard on my 11.5. This is the Midwest Industries combat handguard. It's quite slim and lightweight. I love it. Now, Midwest Industries does make a MCX handguard, and I may get the 12.5-inch version of it sometime for the MCX. I haven't done it yet. It's about a $200 part. I did have one of the Midwest Industries. It was the full-length handguard. I didn't really like it. It is much slimmer and ergonomic, but if I do get one again in the future, I'll get the 12.5-inch. So final thoughts on why you might choose an MCX over an AR-15. Now, I have both, so if that answers your question, I think the MCX is a great choice if you're looking for something that is similar to an AR-15 in terms of ergonomics and controls, but you want something that's a little bit different. I put the MCX Virtus into the same category as things like the SCAR, the ACR, the Bren, where it's kind of, novelty might not be the right word, but it's different enough. It has a little bit of that kind of exotic appeal to it, and yet retains a system that you're familiar with if you've been running AR-15s for a while. I think it's a great option if you have the money to get a lot of the different configurations, meaning if you can drop, I think it's about $600 for a caliber exchange or a different barrel, and you're looking at around $180 to $200 for handguards. But if you have the money to either SBR or Form 1 your gun, or if you get the pistol version and you have the money to drop on a different barrel or a couple different barrels, different handguard, this is a really fun option to own because it's so easy. It's so easy to swap to a different configuration. It really allows you to have a lot of fun with different setups, and I think that's a great option then, especially if you've got the cash to do it. Like I said earlier, in the advantages and limitations, there's just not as much aftermarket, so that is something to consider if you really like getting very specific parts and putting together a gun exactly the way you like it. You don't have as many options. With this gun, if you don't like the OEM handguard, you're going to have to get a Midwest. If you don't like Midwest, then you're pretty much stuck. Same with charging handle. If you don't like the Radian Raptor, what am I saying? Everyone likes the Radian Raptor. But in all seriousness, you only have a couple options for charging handles. So there just isn't quite as much customization. There's a lot of modularity and less customization. Not as much part compatibility. This is important if you're talking about a bug out gun or shit hits the fan gun or end of the world gun. Parts break, things wear out, or maybe you just need to salvage something. The AR-15 is a lot more common. I don't think that you will regret the purchase if you have the money to get an MCX. It's a lot of fun to shoot. It is highly accurate. It is highly modular. And then, let's be honest, it's got a ton of cool factor, which, as we know, is one of the most important things you can have when you buy a gun, is how much cool factor does it have. Anyway, guys, stay safe. I'm Nate with Responsible Armed Korean. Thanks for taking the time to watch this review of the MCX.